All right, welcome back to Base Christian History. Hopefully this is working a lot better than it was before. I apologize for the delay. I've had some technical issues tonight. I made the mistake of doing an update this afternoon before I looked into what the update would change, but I needed to fix the settings because we've been having a lot of problems on some of my live streams on Monday nights because the internet seems to fade out from time to time. So tonight we are going to be looking at Professor Liang. Just give me one sec. Let me pause. Testing. All right. Just changing the microphone here so that it works a little bit better. So welcome back, as I said. All right, so we're off to a bit of a bad start tonight because of the technical issues I was having at the beginning. But just a reminder, my book, Like a Roaring Lion, is out. I've got it sitting here, right here. On this channel, we talk about theology, we do Bible studies, we talk about current events, and we do videos which get into interesting issues from all sorts of different perspectives. Last week, I looked at millennial nostalgia. Before that, I've looked at the housing crisis. I've looked at wars. Tonight, what we're going to look at is the Iran-US war through the perspective of Professor Liang, who is a Chinese academic. This guy is brilliant, and this video is a few weeks old, and it's going to be talking about stuff at the beginning of the war, but what I want you to notice is, as we go through this video, we're going to do this for about an hour. We're not going to go through his whole video because I'm just going to react to parts of it. I want you to notice that he put this out just a few days after the war started, but it's predicted things that are currently happening. All right, so with no further ado, let's get into our video tonight. So I'm just going to...
I hope everyone had a nice break, and welcome back to the end of the world. So as you know, World War III has started. The United States and Israel have started to attack Iran. And we are now in the 4th day of this war. And we can expect this war to last for many weeks, possibly also for many years. But I promise you that after this war is done, the world will never be the same again. So what we will do these next few weeks is use game theory and understand and analyze the geopolitical situation. And so I'm going to teach you the ideas, the theories, the techniques to understand the world around you and make predictions. And we can know if our analysis is correct because all this is happening in real time, and so we can test it against reality. All right?
All right, so we can know his analysis is correct because all of it's happening in real time. We can test it against reality. That is a good test. So now, with all the things that we know about the Iran war, let's take into account what Professor Liang says. I just want to let you know his channel is Predictive History. It's a much bigger channel than my channel, of course. So, but check it out. You'll find some interesting stuff on there, especially his videos on game theory. He is a classics teacher. I believe he was educated in Canada where he grew up. But let's see what he has to say.
So let's go over some basic facts about what's happened so far. So in the early morning of Saturday in Tehran, the Israelis and Americans launched a decapitation strike against the Ayatollah Khamenei, who is the supreme leader of Iran. Now, there are arguments and disputes about as to what happened. The Americans and Israelis said that they had real intelligence about where the leader was, and so they sent airplanes to just bomb the crap out of the place. They also had a spy who was able to record the body of the dead Ayatollah, and then this was announced. At first, the Iranians denied this, and the Iranians insisted he was still alive. But eventually, state media admitted that he did die in the airstrike. But then what they also said is that the Ayatollah, he's 86 years old, and he chose to die. He could have gone to Moscow, but instead he chose to stay in Tehran and die for his people. But not only that, but he died along many of his relatives. He died along with his daughter, his son-in-law, his grandchildren. So many of the family died in this assault. Also, there's been reporting that he had prostate cancer. Okay, so he was going to die fairly soon as well. So what you need to understand first about the war is that even though the Americans and the Israelis claim great success in decapitating the leadership of the Iranians, from the Iranian perspective, this is a martyrdom, okay?
Now, I know that's going to be a bit hard for Western ears to hear because we have a completely different philosophy, a completely different way of looking at the world. But it's really important to understand that sometimes a nation's greatest strengths become its greatest weaknesses. So America and Israel both are really good at decapitation strikes. Great intelligence, great technology, great satellites, great precision weapons, and the will to use them. But what Iran has actually done is it's created a political system which is designed to absorb that kind of damage and resist it. And so many people were expecting that what was going to happen in this war is very similar to what happened in Venezuela. What happened in Venezuela? There was all this bluster and there was all this back and forth between Trump and Maduro. And then this massive military operation was put together using the Navy, using jets, helicopters, Delta Force, this massive combined US operation with the focus on capturing Maduro. But behind closed doors, what was happening is officials were being bribed, the ground was being tilled, people were being told, if you go along with this, we're going to give you this, And at the end of the day, what happened is Maduro was captured and he's now in an American jail. And so you look at that and you think, wow, America took down a whole country in one day. The regime hasn't changed. The regime is still the same socialist government. In fact, I believe it was either President Trump or Marco Rubio or both who said they have no intention of trying to institute liberal-style democracy there in the same way that Bush did with the Iraq wars in the past. But that country is now much more under the thrall of the United States than it was before. And so a lot of people expected that this is what was going to happen in Iran. I believe the Americans even expected this was what was going to happen. The problem is, it didn't happen. In fact, their entire political system was designed to absorb that kind of attack.
And so the religion of the Iranians is called Shia Muslim. And this is different from Sunni Muslim. So Sunnis are the majority. They're about 9% of all Muslims in the world. The Shia have always been the minority. And as such, they've always been persecuted. So in the Shia faith, the core value, the force that binds everyone together and gives them purpose and meaning in life, that galvanizes them into action, is the idea of martyrdom, which forces jihad. To sacrifice yourself for your religion, sacrifice yourself for the common good. So think of the death of Khamenei as a sacrifice, a self-sacrifice, in order to motivate the Iranians in this war, okay? So that's the first thing you need to understand. That for the Iranians, this is not a geopolitical war. This is not an economic war. This is not a war of resistance. This is a jihad. Okay? It's a war against the great Satan to avenge their leader. They will fight to the death. All right? That's number one. Number two is this. Also that morning, when the Ayatollah was killed, they really struck a school in the south of Tehran, killing about 150 school children. These are girls in primary school. And again, there's a lot of debate and argument as to what happened. This really said that, first of all, the school was next to a military base. We were targeting a military base. And second of all, it wasn't us which struck the...
Right, so one of these things he gets wrong here, and this is just because there wasn't enough information at the time to identify exactly who did this, but he thinks it was the Israelis. He assumes it was the Israelis who did this attack because we see lots of strikes on civilian infrastructure in Gaza, Lebanon, places like that. Even in Iran right now, civilian infrastructure is being taken out. But this was done by the United States, and it was a double tap. And what a double tap is is they hid it and then they hid it again when the people are coming in to help the people who are being injured. Now, I want you to think about this. They took out the Shia version of the Pope, and they took out this girls' school in the first strike. This was before Iran had even responded. I want you to think what that does to a religious people with a radical perspective. What does that do? It's kind of scary to think about.
The school, it was a air defense missile that went off course. Okay? And the Iranians insisted no. The Israelis purposefully attacked the school to kill the school children. And then you're like, why would the Israelis do that? But then these few years, well, we've seen what they've done in Gaza, in Palestine to the Palestinians. And it's pretty consistent what the Israelis have been doing. All right? So this action against the Israelis, it's meant to show to themselves and the world that we are now all in. Okay? We've made the sacrifice. We are now committed to this war, to winning this war at all costs. And this action has also provoked the Iranian people to resist with their full might. Okay? So I want you to keep this in mind. And again, we don't have complete evidence that it's the Israelis who did this. But given past actions from the Israelis, this is fairly consistent with what they've done. Okay? So we can assume that this is something the Israelis did. Why they did this, what the purpose is something we will discuss as we move on. Okay? It's very complicated. Next, I want to show you this. This is Dubai. And Dubai is considered one of the wealthiest, safest cities in the world. There are thousands, tens of thousands of Westerners who move to Dubai because it's clean, you don't pay any taxes, you make a lot of money. And
So many people wondered, why was Iran striking at all these targets in Dubai and places like this? Liang is going to answer that, and I think his answer is very spot on.
There are great restaurants. And this is really the economic model of Dubai. It's one of the GCC countries, okay? The Gulf coastal countries. And for the longest time, Dubai had a really good deal because they were under the protection of the American military. So they didn't have to pay for defense. And then they were in the Middle East, which is the oil producing center of the world. And so they focus on aviation, they focus on logistics, they focus on finance, on tourism. They became extremely wealthy, right? I'm not sure if you've taken Emirates, one of the best airlines in the world. So their airport, Dubai Airport, is the busiest in the world. And Dubai, for the longest time, was flourishing under American protection. And Dubai said to the world, listen, we're like Switzerland. We're neutral. We don't want any involvement in any wars. We're here just to take care of our citizens, to make sure everyone has a good time, to make money. And then right after the war started, the Iranians attacked the GCC, okay? Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, they attacked these places. And these places were like, what's going on? We're neutral, man. We're not involved in this war. And the airport was shut down in Dubai. At one point, the rich people in Dubai were willing to pay about $250,000 US just to get on a plane and get out of there.
So personally, I've always wondered why so many people want to visit Israel or go to Dubai or go to Abu Dhabi or places like this. And really, I think the answer comes down to it for a lot of people. Now, I understand why Jewish people want to emigrate there because they see that as their historical land. I get that. I understand that. I understand why Arabic peoples want their societies in the Gulf states and that to flourish. I understand that completely. But I don't understand why Westerners wanted anything to do with going and living in these places because this is a very unstable region of the world. It is incredibly unstable there. But you got to remember that most people have what is called recency bias. Recency bias is that which has happened since I can remember is what will always happen. So these countries haven't really been attacked. Saudi Arabia has been in a war with Yemen. that has mostly affected the Yemenis, not necessarily Saudi Arabia itself. These places are wealthy. I mean, wealthy. The wealth in these places is a level of opulence beyond what most people can really fathom in and of themselves in most other societies. And so people go there and they're captured by this. But the problem with recency bias is it is not a stable foundation for anything. A good example of this is public school, right? Many people, or even private school, many people look at you strangely if you do not want to put your kids in the schooling system. Now, even though homeschooling has been the norm throughout history for most people in history, it has been the norm. It has been the standard. It was the norm. You go back into the Old Testament, the Israelite people were teaching in the homes. In the New Testament, most Christians would have been teaching in their homes. Throughout medieval era, teaching in the homes. In fact, throughout most of history, homeschooling was happening as the majority way of the world was. But since the middle of the 19th century, there's been a big push for public schooling and also private schooling. And so many people now look at you like, well, you're strange if you want to homeschool. Why? Recency bias. They grew up in a school. Their parents probably grew up in a school. Their grandparents may not have grown up in a school, or they might have finished school really early and been working by the time they were 13, 14, or 15, right? But there's a recency bias about how things have happened, therefore things must continue to happen in that way. That is the way human beings are. We are biased to that which is most recent. Now that is not actually rational, because history is not stable. History is in flux. You know, the world affairs are in flux. And this is not a stable world. This is an unstable world with breaks of stability, which lead to complacency. But really, it's an unstable world, and we should be recognizing that hotspot areas of the world are hotspot areas of the world, even though they might not have been in our recent memory. They still are, generally speaking, hotspot areas of the world for a reason.
Okay? So, the reality is this. For the longest time, Dubai had a reputation for being safe, and that's why people moved their money there. Guess what, guys? After what the Iranians did, it's dead. Dubai as a city, in the long term, it is dead. Because you're a wealthy Westerner, you're not going to move to a place where it could be attacked anytime by the Iranians. You might move to Singapore, you might move to Hong Kong, Japan, South America, but you're not moving to Dubai, okay? So the big question for us is, why did the Iranians do this? It was the Israelis and Americans who attacked you, why go after the GCC? All right? And not only that, but they're escalating the attacks against the GCC. So this is something that we will look at very closely today. Well, the short answer is because these places, even though they pretend to be neutral, they house the American military. They allow the Israelis and the Americans to use their airspace to attack Iran from. All right? So this is Bahrain. Now, Bahrain is interesting, okay? Because I want you guys to remember this. But Bahrain will probably be one of the major centers of this conflict. Because, first of all, this is the American Fifth Fleet. All right? This is their naval base in the Middle East. And as you can see, the Iranians are attacking it with missiles. And it's being blown up. Bahrain is interesting because it has about 50% or even more, okay, Shia, which is the religion of the Iranians. But the people in charge are the Sunnis. And so what makes this strike really important from our perspective is, first of all, not only are the Iranians attacking US military assets, not only are they destroying the economies of the GCC, but they're also trying to ignite a religious war, right? Because you're Shia, you're loyal to the Ayatollah. And if he's dead, then you must, as a religious obligation, now commit jihad against your enemies. And it's no different in other religions where, listen, if you want to kill the Pope, the Catholics would be really angry at you and they would want to kill you, right? So now you have the Shia who will probably eventually arise, creating a revolution.
You don't, oh my goodness, it's so terrible what's happened.
So I think Bahrain will be the first to fall. Dubai will probably go bankrupt.
Guys like the Pope.
But in the long term, we can expect the entire GCC area including Saudi Arabia, to eventually collapse, okay? And so this is something we'll use game theory to understand. All right.
So he's predicting that, he's basically arguing that Iran's strategy is to start a holy war. And they're saying basically, look, they attacked our version of the Pope. So they're trying to stir up this stuff in the Middle East. And, you know, a lot of these Middle Eastern countries are very mixed in religion. Also, although Sunni are very dominant. But it's like the difference between Protestants and Catholics. But could you imagine what the response of the Catholics in the world would be? I mean, remember the Crusades. Remember the Crusades. In other words, what he's arguing is that we're facing sort of a version of that kind of danger right now. The escalation ladder has continued to go up since he has given this talk, and a lot of the things which he's going to talk about in this, we're going to see, have been coming true. Let's see what else he has to say.
Let's continue. So, we will know how this war develops just based on geography, okay? So this is a map. And this map, even if you don't really know the war, even if you don't know the participants, even if you don't know the weaponry, this map will tell you exactly how this war will progress. All right, so some certain things to keep in mind about this map.
Now, what I find interesting about this is what he's going to talk about here is basically the geography in Iran and the region around it, but also a little bit about the American strategy and the Iranian strategy. And what we're seeing is how these two strategies are interacting and competing against each other right now. But if you look at that map, you look at Iran, it is a mountainous country. It is filled with mountains. It is, and one of the problems that the US military had in Afghanistan, it's the same problem. It's a mountainous country. And in mountainous countries, it's very hard to deal and control them. And there is a reason why Iran, which is Persia, Iran comes from the ancient name for Persia, which is Iran Shahar, which means land of the Aryans. That's what Iran means. It's not a modern Muslim name. That name goes back into ancient history. You can read Tom Holland's histories on the Persians to find out about that, or you can look this up in other places as well. There's plenty of sources where you can find that out. But one of the reasons why this society has proved so resilient is because it is a mountainous society, and it is hard to defeat a mountainous society. It is not easy to do at all. And when the Muslims conquered Persia in the 7th century, at the same time as they conquered, around the same time as they conquered the Eastern Roman Empire, the reason why they were able to do this is both Rome and Persia had massively weakened themselves because of a long war, which the emperor, I believe his name was Heraclius of ancient Rome, had actually won and defeated the Persians and pushed them back into their lands and actually pushed them away. It was actually quite a significant victory. But then as they were still licking their wounds from that and trying to rebuild their strength, because they damaged each other massively, the Arab army surprised everyone, came out of the Middle East, and the rest is history. So even that defeat was only because of very unique circumstances.
This is what we call this area, okay, really small, it's 33 kilometers wide, okay? People can swim across it. It's really, really narrow, okay? This small area, guys, it's called the Strait of Hormuz, all right? And it's important because it's really the center of the world. This one area is the nexus, the pivot of the world. Let me explain why. First of all, from the GCC, you have 20% of all the world's oil flowing through this narrow strait. Where does it go, guys? It goes to Asia, India, Pakistan, South Korea, China, Japan. India depends on 60% of its oil from this area. China depends on 40%. Japan, 75%. Prime Minister Takaichi of Japan has said that, listen, if the Strait of Hormuz closes, we will run out of oil in about 8-9 months. The entire Japanese economy would collapse in 8-9 months if the Strait of Hormuz were to close. And guess what? The Iranians have closed the Strait of Hormuz. Okay? So we can expect that the entire global economy will suffer greatly over the next few months. All right, so that's point number one. Point number two is, Okay, so the GCC sends oil.
We can expect that the entire global economy will suffer over the next few months. Remember, this video came out, hang on a sec, let me bring up, when did this video come out? Exactly 3 weeks ago. In this Tuesday, March 3rd, 2026 lecture. So that's nearly 4 weeks ago, but this video came out just a few weeks ago, and he's predicting you can expect severe economic struggles for the next coming months. And what are we experiencing right now? Severe economic struggles. Already, petrol and diesel prices have skyrocketed. They've skyrocketed. Farmers are struggling to get their fertilizers. This is going to have an impact on any product which has oil in its production chain, which is every single thing on the planet. Electric cars are built on machines that have oil that lubricate those machines so they can get done. There is oil in various different aspects of an electric car. In the rubber tires, in the brake lines, there's various different kinds of hydraulic oil. There's a whole bunch of different aspects of the production cycle require oil just to get the machines to work to make these things. So while they might be paying a lot less for their average drive right now because electricity prices are still stable, what's going to happen over time is everything is going to go up in price if this Strait of Hormuz is not reopened. And it's actually not technically closed right now. It's really just well, I guess it is closed, but basically the way it was closed is Lloyd's of London removed the insurance, and then people are like, we're not going to go through here if our hundreds of millions of dollars worth of cargo is not insured for the journey. It's just too much of a risk. Who wants to put that kind of risk on their balance statement? So in other words, he predicted this was going to lead to a severe economic problem. A lot of people I was discussing this with thought, no, Trump's going to contain this within a few days, or a week or so, or a couple of weeks, and the fact that he has control over Venezuela, the fact that he promised the Navy was going to protect the ships going through that region, all of this is going to keep oil prices from going up too high. But we have not seen that happen. In fact, they are continuing to go up as we speak. They were just more expensive today than they were. I filled up just a couple of days ago. They're already more expensive again. Everyone is seeing that right now. And it is going to very likely get a lot worse before it gets better.
Across the Strait of Hormuz, and what do they get back in return? Food, guys. All right, so people don't appreciate the GCC, but it is really the linchpin of the American empire. Because what is the American empire? The American empire is the petrodollar. All right? The idea of the petrodollar is this: the US dollar is worth nothing. It's only valuable if people want it. But the GCC says that if you want oil from us, you have to pay us in US dollars. Okay? Then that is the basis of the value of the US dollar. So, if the GCC collapses, the American economy and the American empire both collapse at the same time. The problem, though, is the GCC is an artificial construct of empire. It does not exist naturally. Why? Because there's no food, there's no oil, no water. Okay, guys? No food.
You know, this is a really important point. This is actually a really important point that he's making here. These nations only really exist because they're massive financial hubs. They're like massive big mining settlements or nations connected to mining settlements where the amount of resources that these countries have, like oil and gas and stuff like this, is so much that they're able to take taxes from that to make their way of life relatively cheap, so they can import food, they can bring in water, they can desalinate water with desalination plants. I mean, some of these countries, the majority of the water they get is from desalination, which means these societies are incredibly complex, and the more complex something is, the more fragile it is. Now, one of my favorite books, which I have around somewhere, I'm not exactly sure, actually I think my wife has it upstairs because she was reading it. It's called 1177 BC, The Year That Civilization Fell. This is a phenomenal book. It is a fantastic book. Eric Klein, I believe, is the author. I know the last name is Klein, but this book shows how connected ancient civilizations once were. You go back to like the 12th century BC and before it, the ancient Bronze Age civilization, you have the Aegean Greeks, you've got the Phoenicians, you've got the Egyptians, you've got the Babylonians were connected to it, many other different ancient societies. You got Tarshish, which some people believe was either in Spain or Britain. This society became so complex and started to specialize in certain different products that what happened is when devastation came to one area of the civilization, it caused the whole rest of civilization to collapse. Now, I'm not arguing that civilization is going to collapse because of this war, although it's not outside the realm of possibilities. But our civilization has become ridiculously complex. Australia's whole food system, just our food, forget everything else. Australia's whole food system is based on diesel. We need diesel to get trucks everywhere. Australia does not have a massive train network like bullet trains or anything like that, which are quite expensive to build but very effective. So there are freight trains in this country, but our country runs on trucks, man, and those trucks use diesel, and we get most of our diesel from overseas, from Singapore, and that fuel comes from this region and other parts of the world at that nexus hub. In other words, we were always exposed. I remember years ago watching on, I believe it was on Sky News, and they had this Liberal guy and they had this Labour guy. That's our left and right version of politics, or centre left and centre right. And they were talking about how they're going to shut down the oil refineries. They're like, we don't need them, we can just get them from Singapore. They were talking about how they're going to shut down manufacturing. Like, we don't need it, we can just buy our cars from China and Japan and Korea. These guys, I remember thinking, these guys are so foolish. This is so dangerous. Our country in a time of war is going to be exposed, and we're now experiencing the downsides of that. I've got friends who've said they worked at fuel stations in the early 2000s. Australia had enough refineries to be basically fuel independent. But what's happened over time is they've gotten rid of those refineries, and they've gone with a half-hearted attempt to push us towards renewable energy, because it's quite obvious to many people that renewables can't really replace the fossil fuel industry and road network that we have. And we're now caught in the worst of possible worlds now, where partly we are in the green energy revolution, but it hasn't gone far enough to really be effective yet. So you can't get food everywhere with trucks. But partly we have degraded our ability to produce our own fuel to the point where we're now scrambling as a nation because of this. And if you think it's bad here, in these GCC countries, it's even worse, because they rely not by design, but by necessity on things from overseas, and now that fragility has been exposed.
No water. So these cities are able to grow in the millions because of all these petrodollars flowing in. If you close off the Strait of Hormuz, there's no food coming in, right? They're all going to starve. How much food does the GCC get from overseas? 80%. 80% of all the food it consumes comes from overseas, that it imports. It doesn't grow by itself, it imports. All right? So the Strait of Hormuz is really key. And again, the Iranians will close it in order to strangle the global economy and therefore bankrupt the American empire. All right? Second thing you will notice is these mountains. These mountains is what we call Iran. All right, this is Iran. This is GCC. Okay, this is not a fair matchup, right? Because these are mountains. And what can you do in mountains? Well, you can hide rocket bases. You can hide drone bases. You can hide missiles. And that's the entire Iranian offensive strategy. All right? From here, they can hide missiles and drones from which to attack the GCC. And what are they attacking? They're attacking three things, right? They're attacking American military bases. American military bases. That's number one. Okay? Is it possible for the Americans to defend against these attacks? The answer is no. It's not. It's the silliest thing in the world. You have all these bases in the Middle East, but you cannot defend them against the Iranians. That's kind of strange. Okay, but that's number one. Number two is oil and energy. How hard is it to blow up an oil field with a drone? Not hard at all. Can you defend these oil fields? No, you cannot. All right? Number three, and this is most important, is water. Okay? You guys don't know this, but the GCC has little access to fresh water.
I want to really emphasize this complexity thing. I mean, whether you're talking about in engineering or whether you're just talking in organizational structure, or if you're talking in civilizational structure, the complexity of something speaks to how fragile it is. The more complex something is, the easier it is to pull out one little aspect of it which causes the whole thing to collapse. In engineering, you know, engines which are very simple, like an old school diesel, like an old school 1985 Toyota Hilux diesel, or they might call them Forerunners in America, I'm not sure what they called them in the 1980s. Those old diesels were very simple engines, and therefore they were very reliable. And that's part of what gave the diesel engines, especially in Australia, this you know, reputation of being these great outback cars. But the problem is, over time, diesel engines, because of emission standards from Europe and stuff like that, are becoming incredibly complicated. And you know, one of the things that mechanics like to joke about with supercars is how temperamental they are. If you want to own a Ferrari or something, it doesn't just cost a lot of money to buy it. To service it and maintain it and keep that thing running is really difficult because those engines are so complex. It needs specialized parts. In other words, they've placed the most complicated societal structure right next to one of the most dangerous places on the planet to defend from, the Iranian mountains. It's so foolish, it's almost like it was deliberate.
So the only way that it can produce water is what we call desalination plants, okay? These factories that take salt water and then through an electrical chemical process turn it into fresh water for the population to use. 60% of the water supply in the GCC comes from desalination plants, okay? 60%. Is it hard to blow up a desalination plant using a drone? The answer is, it's very easy. You understand? Okay? So you have this absurd situation where Iran is a mountain fortress where it can hide its offensive capacity, and the GCC, it's just this desert, this flat desert, and it is exposed to attack, and there's nothing it can do about it. Okay? So at any point in this war, the Iranians can choose to just destroy the entire GCC, and there's nothing that anyone can do about it. Okay? But Iran also has a weakness, okay? And this is fundamental. So Iran also has a water problem, okay? So for the longest time, they suffered a drought issue. Okay, just climate change. And so what the plan of the Israelis and Americans is destroy the water supply of the Iranians. Because the fortress, it is a mountain fortress, but it can also be a mountain prison as well, where people are trapped inside with no access to water. Okay, so what we're going to see right now, we're already seeing attacks on civilian infrastructure, hospitals. In the future, you'll see attacks on water supply, on dams, on reservoirs, on power plants. The point, the idea is to make Iran so inhabitable that the people will have to rebel against the people. Or
we've already seen that happening. Remember, he said this nearly 4 weeks ago. It says 3 weeks ago here on YouTube, but it was basically nearly 4 weeks ago that he said this. But they've attacked civilian infrastructure, they've attacked hospitals. America and Israel have now attacked a massive gas field, although Trump argued that wasn't us, that was Israel, and there's that back and forth that we see. But effectively, his predictions are coming true. The escalation ladder is meaning that both sides are increasingly going after their vulnerabilities. Now, that is a really bad thing for us, because the more those vulnerabilities are attacked, the more there will be a response, which means the longer this war goes on. I do not think this is going to be a short war. I think it's gotten out of Trump's control. I really do think that. Some people disagree. They think that Trump has this whole thing under control, that he knows what he's doing, he's got it all working according to a plan. But something you need to know about military plans, or any kind of plan, no plan, survives contact with the enemy. And that's true for Iran's plan as well. I mean, they've been degraded. Both sides have been degraded in this war.
Or there'll be a refugee crisis in Iran. Okay? So as you can see from this map, this war, it is the end of the world. Okay? Both sides have the potential to destroy each other. It's really a question of how far do they want to go. All right? We can also say this is almost a game of chicken. Okay? We can blow each other up.
Which is horrific to
How
think
far do you
about,
want to
isn't
go?
it? Yeah.
And the problem is this. The problem is that the Iranians are Shia, which believes in martyrdom. And you've killed the religious leader, the Ayatollah Khamenei. So they're willing to go very, very far. The GCC countries are Muslim, but they're materialistic. They love money. And also, most of the population are expatriates, foreigners. 90% of Dubai are foreigners. Guess what's going to happen if they suffer? They're going to run away. Okay? So this is not a fair matchup. The big question that people have is, first of all, are the Americans going to use ground troops? Because the only way that you can defeat Iran is by using ground troops, okay? That's a big question we'll look at.
There's this guy that I know online. He's a really smart guy. He's a good guy, but he's probably much more to the left than I am. He's a Christian. Good guy, though. But he kept putting up these posts last year, at least a few times I saw him put them up, about the eschatological end times views of the Iranians. And I was like, why are you concerned about this, man? It's the end time views of the Christian Zionists, the dispensationalists that we should be worried about. These people think that they need to start a war with Iran as part of the end times plan. Why are you going on? And it finally clicked to me. I didn't really pay as much attention to it as I should have. But it clicked to me what he was trying to say with these posts is these guys are committed to their belief. Radical Islam is bad. I'm against it. I'm against radical Islam. I'm a Christian. I am against it. But these people are not. The Iranians, they believe in this stuff. And especially their leaders, their military, many aspects of their society, the aspects of society which count when it comes to this war, believe in this stuff. And the way that Israel and the US have started this war is basically to trigger all of their end times views and make them feel like that this war is existential. This war is existential. Trump talks about in the media about how he's just looking for a deal and he's trying to get the best, resource deal or that deal, or he's just trying to contain them or this or that. But they don't see it that way. They see this as they fight or it's the end. That's the way they're looking at this. So when you're in a fight with somebody like that, it can get out of control really quickly. This was a foolish war. Even those who think it was justified because of WMDs, whatever, the oppressive regime, I agree it's oppressive regime. I do not think they're the good guys. It doesn't always have to be good versus bad in a fight. Sometimes it's just one side versus another side, and both sides can have big problems, right? And the United States is an awesome country. I think it's sad that they keep wasting so much of their wealth and energy in Middle Eastern wars, but it is what it is, right? We can't stop that. All we can do is observe it. But what he's pointing out here is that these guys are radicals. They really believe this, and they're willing to go a lot further than those whose biggest concern is what their bills are going to cost at the end of the week. There's a completely different perspective here, a completely different perspective that they're coming from.
The next few weeks, will America send its army, 500,000, 2 million soldiers to topple the government? Okay, that's question number one. Question number two, nuclear weapons.
Will America send its army in? Ground troops. If you go to my Substack, RevMatt Substack on Substack, or you can go to younggospelminister.blogspot.com. You can check out my article, which is titled Ground Troops. And in that article, I mentioned something which is really important. There was a lot of people who were saying how this is not Iraq 2.0 because Trump's just going to do limited airstrikes. The idea is to topple the regime, get victory that way, and this is not going to turn into Iraq 2.0. Now what we're seeing is they're getting the Marines, they've passed laws allowing for a draft. This guy predicts there is going to be a military draft in the United States. This is going to become a major war. It's going to continue to escalate. But the thing which I argue in that article, because remember, I was in the military. I was in the Australian Defence Force. I was a reservist. I did not serve overseas, but I was in the military. Is you got to understand, you cannot win wars without ground troops. Even Venezuela, they had Delta Force at the tip of the spear. That's what ground troops are, the tip of the spear. Everything else in the military, the planes, everything exists to enable the tip of the spear to do its job. I say, well, Matt, in 2012, June 2012 last year, they won without troops on the ground. No, they didn't. They got a ceasefire. Iran and Israel and the US fought each other to an air war stalemate. There are reports that Israel wanted to make a deal. There are reports that Iran wanted to make a deal. There's reports that Trump wanted both sides to stop fighting. But what they were able to do is get a ceasefire. Now, this means that Iran does not really have the ability to defeat Israel either, because without getting troops into Israel, they cannot really control the country. So ground troops are fundamental towards victory in a war. And so there are many people saying this is not going to turn into Iraq 2.0 because Trump's plan is not to send in ground troops. And I just pointed out in an article, I think that was a lie all along. Either one, he's going to back down, and I don't think Trump's going to do that. He'll back down, and that will be, he'll try to spin it as a victory, but it will be a defeat. Either two, he's going to send in ground troops, or three, they're going to send in special forces to train insurgents in the region to be their ground troops, which will lead to American ground troops anyway, because that's where that goes. So there was always going to be either, once the decapitation strike at the start failed to have any effect except to escalate into a massive war, once that happened, ground troops became inevitable.
If you're losing a war, would you choose to use nuclear weapons? Okay, that's another big question that we have, okay? Another big question that we have is who gets involved? Because this situation is so dire that Europe, okay, specifically Germany, France, and Britain are talking about entering this war. And guess what? If that happens, it is possible that Russia and China will also enter this war on the side of the Iranians. This is World War III, okay? Because of the importance of the Strait of Hormuz, because of the importance of the Middle East, everyone has to get involved at some point. And we're going to use game theory to really try to understand what's happening on the ground and where this could lead us. Okay? All right. You guys understand? All right. All right. Let's continue. Okay, so again, there are American bases all over the Middle East. And originally, these bases were established to protect them from basically their own people, okay? These are monarchies that were imposed on these nations by the Anglo-American Empire, the British first, and then the Americans came to support these monarchies. And so they provide defense. But then you're like, wait a minute here. I mean, didn't we just say that these American bases can actually defend these people, that they're exposed? And the answer is yes, that's true. But remember, like the American military was built during the Cold War. Okay? And the Cold War was a war.
Now, this is a data point that I've seen people struggle with a lot in online discussions and in-person discussions, is many people actually cannot come to terms with the limits of the American military. This is for several reasons. One, they've been brought up on a propagandized view of World War II, where America basically won the war almost single-handed, which is, came in and rescued the Brits, which is not true. The British Empire at the time was the largest empire in the world. It was overextended, but it had considerable might. Its navy and its air force and its army. Its army was relatively small compared to France's army, but it was not insignificant. The British, the American nation at the time, was the industrial power of the world. It was powerful, and its weight did make a massive difference. There's no downplaying that. The amount of impact that the US had in that war was phenomenal. American military might was able to give to the Russians more military equipment than the Germans were able to build for the entire war. That's not including what the Americans made for themselves, sold to the British or to others. Then you've got the Russians. The vast majority of Germans who died in battle died on the Russian front and the Eastern front. It was the most vicious part of the war. The Russians had a phenomenal industrial base themselves. A lot of it was taken out by the Nazis. I think Sukharov, in the chief culprit, estimates 90% of the Russian industrial base was wiped out, and with the other 10% they were able to conquer nearly half of Europe, and really were brought to a halt by the fact that America was controlling the other half. So my point is, that war was a combined team effort, and the United States' impact in that war was phenomenal. They were very strong. In fact, that was the peak of their power, really, or maybe they peaked just slightly after that war. But that was the peak of their power. But if you look at American wars since then, Korea, Vietnam, various Middle Eastern wars, the US hasn't done very well. Now, a lot of people bring up, well, what about the Gulf War? America won that handedly. Look how easily they won the Gulf War in the 90s against Saddam. But if you actually look into the Gulf War, you'll see that what the United States did is they brought together a coalition of nations from around the world who inputted in multiple different ways, technology, resources, and everything. And basically, they all ganged up on Iraq, which had a very poorly equipped military compared to the US military and all of that which was involved. And they crushed that tiny little country very quickly. But even that war was indecisive because Saddam Hussein was still in power until a decade later, just over a decade later, when Bush Jr. went in for the Iraq War, which was really the Gulf War 2.0. It was to finish off that job. My point being that US power has historically been quite strong, but not as strong as people think. I mean, you've got to remember, Russia and America never squared off directly. They never squared off directly. They avoided each other. They avoided each other assiduously, very, very deliberately, because to face each other would have probably meant the mutual destruction of both, which is where MAD come from, mutually assured destruction, because they both had nuclear weapons, but even just at a military perspective. But my point is, the American might is not what people think, but they have a caricature of what happened in World War II, which leads them to a misunderstanding of how powerful America is. They've been brought up on American war movies and action movies, which basically show that the Americans are able to do basically anything militarily. But if you look at their record in Iraq and Afghanistan and other parts of the Middle East, they have really struggled to have a lasting military impact. And we're starting to see that much more conclusively today. I think it's been the weakness of American power, the limits of American power at least, have been evident for a while. But the problem is, many people in the West won't accept that, and many of the people in power in the United States and even some other countries won't accept that, and so they keep getting themselves into these military adventures which are just bringing disaster. And it is a real shame to see, because I am on Team America. I love the United States. I think it is one of the greatest nations that have ever existed. I don't think it's the greatest because I'm from Britain, well, at least my dad is, and I think Australia's awesome, but I think the United States system, the United States society is an incredible gift to this world, and it is a real shame to see them exceed their limits and put themselves in this situation. But look at what Professor Liang has to say about this.
War between the Soviet Union and America. And so the Cold War was defined as something called MAD, mutually assured destruction, because both had nuclear weapons, okay? So they didn't really go to war against each other. And so in other words, these bases aren't really meant to defend these nations from other enemies. They're really meant to impose American authority in the Middle East, okay? And it's the idea of this. It's the idea that empire, it is really a image. It is a hallucination. It's just an idea. Empire is it's an aura of invincibility and invincibility, okay? If you fear it, then you'll obey it. But it's not really designed to fight a war, okay? And so that's why we have this absurd situation. And because there are so many bases in the GCC, that gives the Iranians the perfect pretext to attack them in order to destroy the GCC economy, which will destroy the American empire, right? All right, so this is how the war is shipping out, okay? So the red is the Israelis and the Americans. The yellow are the Iranians. And as you can see, the Iranians are attacking everywhere, primarily Israel, okay? But also, as you can see, a lot of focus on Bahrain and Qatar. And again, the intention is to destabilize the economy and the government. Okay, it's to try to get as much instability as possible. All right? Okay, and as you can see, the Americans and Israelis are focused on Tehran. And so the Americans and the Israelis use something we call shock and awe. And the very idea of shock and awe is you decapitate the enemy. You cut off the head, the body will fall down, okay? The problem, though, is, again, the Iranians see this as a religious war. And so the Iranians have announced total war.
Pete Hegseth went on about this at the start of the war. He talked about, and you might see a lot less from this guy than you did at the start. I think it's because he's been a little bit humbled by the fact that his strategy has failed. But he was talking about how they're going to take off all the restraints. They're going to hit them as hard as possible. They're going to hit them with the kind of airstrikes that no one's ever seen before. They're going to hit them so hard. And it's like this idea, we hit them massively at the start. That will end the war. But one of the and a lot of people thought, yeah, this is going to succeed. But a lot of people have failed to take into account that Russia has been attacking Ukraine and hitting Ukraine massively for 4 years now, and Ukraine is still fighting. Ukraine is still standing. Ukraine is still succeeding in resisting Russia. Russia is making ground. Russia is winning. But it's a slow slog because the Ukrainians have resilience. And they have resilience because they had a powerful military. They were set up, trained by the United States, Europe. They've been funded from outside. But it's because it's also a relatively large nation, so it had resilience. Now, Iran is a nation of 89 million people. It has been preparing for this war for decades. The idea that it was just going to get knocked out in round one is ridiculous. The idea it was going to get knocked out in round two is also ridiculous. They have the ability to go for a significant amount of time. And the question now is, can America and Israel keep pace to continue to go with that? That is a big question.
Okay? And so what this means is that right now command and control in Iran is decentralized. There's no one person telling everyone what to do. Every region has its own orders, has its own strategy. And so if you knock out Tehran, everyone else keeps on going. So if you take off the head, it doesn't change anything. Okay? But unfortunately, the Israelis and the Americans use this as a military doctrine. Military doctrine just means how you design your military for what purpose. And so even though the Americans seem like an invincible army, they are not equipped to fight a 21st century war against drones, against destabilization, against religious fanatics. Okay, they're just not. All right, but unfortunately, because of military doctrine, they're going to keep on attacking Tehran. Now, the great irony of all this is that the Iranians who will be most supportive of you, of regime change, are actually in the cities, because they are.
His point about the fact that the American military is not designed to fight this kind of war is actually really important, because the American military is what's called a second generation war. It's a second generation military. Their doctrine is basically you line up land, air, and sea, and you fire as much power at the enemy as possible, and you break them down. And that worked in World War II. But first generation war you can think of is the first generation of modern war is like the old colonial troops lining up against each other. Second generation is war, is air, land, and sea. I mean, you started off with artillery, then you bring in the air and in the 20th century, but it's basically the form of war which we saw in World War I, World War II. World War I was the transition between first and second generation. Third generation warfare is maneuver warfare, where you outmaneuver the enemy. So, for example, when the Germans did a blitzkrieg at the start of World War II and they just cut off the supply lines for the French military and defeated them with barely a fight. And the Russians actually did the same thing to the Japanese over in the east as well, which terrified the Japanese and is a big part of why the Japanese surrendered. It wasn't just because of the Americans, it was also because they were terrified of the Russians, right? And then you've got fourth generation warfare, which is what we basically call non-state actors, which is, you know, your terrorist groups and all that sort of stuff. And some people are arguing that fifth generation warfare is now drone warfare, because that extends the effective range beyond the 5-kilometer battlefield, which is historically true, to now the rear sections are now under much more threat because of the range and effectiveness of drones. My point being, America is set up for a second generation battle of army versus army, where the one with the most firepower wins. But Iran is using an asymmetric form of defense, which is basically designed to find all the weaknesses in that form of warfare. And so these two powers are not as unevenly matched as people think. I mean, the United States is more powerful, it's wealthier, it's got the bigger military, but its military doctrine actually limits how it can fight this war, and we're seeing that play out.
They're educated, they're progressive. The people who are most fundamentally against you, will fight you to the death, are religious fanatics, the Shia militants, living in the rural areas, okay? So this is a really silly thing where you are actually destroying those who will most likely support you, and you're leaving alone those who are most likely to commit jihad against you. All right? Any questions so far, guys? Are you clear? All right. So another idea that I want you guys to understand is the idea of asymmetry. Asymmetry. All right. So what is asymmetry? Asymmetry means that the two sides are choosing to fight different wars using different techniques because one is much stronger than the other, okay? America is a great empire. It has unlimited resources. It has the USD. It controls the world, right? Iran is a country that has been under economic sanctions for the past 45 years. It's poor. Its technology is very limited, okay? But as we learn in this class, actually, those nations that are poor actually have more energy. They're more open, and they're more cohesive. All right, so let me give you an example. This is what we call the Shahad drones. Shahad drones. Each of these drones costs $50,000.
Those countries which are poor are more open and more cohesive. Think about that. Think about how the West has been fractured by individualism. And in fact, the pursuit of wealth inevitably leads to individualism when you think about it, because you can gratify your individual desires. Whereas if you strangle a country economically for decades, you're going to create a society where people have to learn to work together. I've got a lot of South African friends, and they'll talk about how in South Africa, the sanctions that were put on that country to try and break apartheid actually helped them to become far more adept at creating the kind of things that they need for themselves. I knew a guy who was a military engineer. He actually helped to design one of their advanced attack helicopters, which was then very attractive to nations overseas, but they weren't allowed to really buy it because of the restrictions that were put on South Africa. There are many different ways in which that nation had to adapt. Eventually they fell apart because of internal pressure to change the way things were. But my point is that putting pressure on a nation economically can actually cause them to draw together in ways. And in time of war, that means that if you attack a nation which has been drawn together like that, they're much stronger than people might realize. The same thing happened with Russia. Russia turned out to be way stronger than most people realized, even though it had been under sanctions for ages. And a lot of us thought that with these massive sanctions that they were going to bring on Russia, that the society would collapse, but it didn't collapse. It actually got stronger. Let's just have one more look at what he's saying, and then we'll wrap up tonight's video.
At most, okay? At most. It can go as cheap as 35,000 US dollars. But one of them is $50,000. As you can see, you can fit a lot of these drones to a truck that can go anywhere in Iran, and they can hide anywhere. All right? So the thing to understand is, first of all, these drones are cheap. They're easy to make. They make about 500 a day. Okay? And estimates are about there's 80,000 right now that the Iranians have. So they can go on for a long, long time. Okay? And one of these drones, again, can knock out a desalination plant. It can knock out an oil field. It can knock out a hotel. It can do a lot of damage. Okay? And it's easily transportable. You can hide it anywhere. You can use it from anywhere, okay? And that's what the Iranians are using as an offensive weapon. And how do the Americans defend against this? They use something called a THAAD, right? Right, guys? This is what they use. THAAD. THAAD stands for Thermal High Altitude Air Defense. And they also have like Patriot systems. There's a lot, okay? The thing that you need to know about the system is it's really expensive. This missile, guys, costs $1 million. $1 million. So there's this 50,000.
$1 million. $1 million compared to $50,000. So if you're a lot poorer, but your equipment is a lot cheaper, you can use that. I want you to think about this. It takes 2-3 of those missiles, these incredibly advanced, incredibly intricate, and very clever technology, right? But it takes 2 or 3 of them to knock out one of those drones. They're worth $1 million each. The drone's $50,000. It's much easier to produce that drone. In other words, he's talking about asymmetry here. What some countries have been doing is they've been working out what the United States strengths are and how do you interact with those strengths to weaken those strengths. So these THAADs are also based on highly advanced radar systems that are being knocked out across the Middle East. And so this war has not gone how a lot of people in the West expected it to go, because we have been arrogant, and in our hubris, we have actually again underestimated the enemies in this world and what they can do in response. And so I think it's really interesting to look at Professor Liang's videos. I share this tonight. I don't endorse everything he says because I haven't listened to everything he says. I've watched a few of his videos now, these game theory videos. I find them very interesting because they have gotten a lot correct. America's massive technological and wealth advantage has not won this war yet. In fact, it keeps escalating and getting worse and worse because Iran's strategy is to cause economic destruction. America's strategy is fire for effect. We'll hit you harder and harder. But Iran is a mountainous country. They've got underground cities, underground networks, underground factories, underground everything. And this is going to be a very difficult war, and I don't see this ending anytime soon because I do not believe that Donald Trump is going to back down, and I do not believe the Iranians are going to back down. So my encouragement to you is I would be preparing for the economic sanctions which we're facing now the economic troubles which we're facing now to continue for some time, I would be cutting down on unnecessary expenses. I would be looking into cheaper forms of transport. I'd be looking at how to shed debt. I would be looking at how to secure some spare food, at least having a couple of weeks of spare food put aside, stuff which is non-perishable would be wise. You know, I believe that ultimately our trust is in God. Ultimately our trust is in God. Let me just finish by reading a passage. Hang on a sec. Where is it? Let me finish by reading a passage, because ultimately the focus of our videos is on God and what his word says. And so even though tonight we're looking at more of sort of like a political interest video, the war, the Iran war, if you want to watch the rest of that, just check out on YouTube Game Theory number 9, the US-Iran war, predictive history. You can look that up. And look at the rest of Professor Liang's video. I'll just let you know that we got up to minute 28, so there's another 15-20 minutes left there to watch if you would like to watch the rest of that video and hear what he has to say. But let me just read something from the Bible tonight as we're finishing up, because I think it's important not to just talk about the fact that this war probably will get worse, but to reflect on the fact of what Liang says. He says, I promise you, when this war ends, this world is going to be different. I believe that is true. I believe we're seeing the end of US power, or at least we're going to see the massive shrinking down of US power because of this war, because of what's happened. I do believe that's going to happen. I think that the limits of that power were reached some time ago, but this is going to force a lot of people to finally admit it. Something that people did not want to admit before now, they're going to be forced to admit by what's happening in this conflict. I believe this is going to change how different countries get access to resources. I believe this is going to cause countries to work hard to become self-sufficient. You're going to see countries around the world who are going to be securing their own oil supplies, their own resource supplies, and making sure that their own countries are hardened from this kind of impact for at least the foreseeable future, because people are going to be learning the hard way that we were overexposed by our economic system, which means it's going to be harder to get cheap technology and cheap things from overseas, because a lot of nations are going to be doing much more favorable trade deals towards their own country with their own products. We're going to see manufacturing across different countries start to come back alive again, because it's going to be necessary. Already we're seeing signs of that starting to happen. I mean, China is keeping its oil as much and a lot of its resources there to bolster it for long, hard times ahead. And I think you're wise if you're doing that, but ultimately our trust is not in the things of this world. So I don't want to preach fear on this channel at all. I have great hope. You know, World War II was devastating, but the world came into an unprecedented time of prosperity after it, which spread across the globe. Poverty was going down across the globe right up until 2020, where it started to tick up again because of foolish policies. But we have these upturns after significantly bad events where things can get a lot better. But ultimately, our trust is not in material things. Our trust is in God. So let me just read one of my favorite Psalms to finish off tonight. Psalm 62, it's got 12 verses. For God alone my soul waits in silence. From him comes my salvation. He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be greatly shaken. How long will you all attack a man to batter him, like a leaning wall, a tottering fence? They only plan to thrust him down from his high position. They take pleasure in falsehood. They bless with their mouths, but inwardly they curse. For God alone, O my soul, wait in silence, for my hope is from him. He only is my rock and my salvation, my fortress. I shall not be shaken. On God rests my salvation and my glory. My mighty rock, my refuge is God. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. Trust in him at all times, O people. Pour out your heart before him. God is a refuge for us. Those of low estate are but a breath. Those of high estate are a delusion. In the balance as they go up, they are together lighter than a breath. Put no trust in extortion. Set no vain hopes on robbery. If riches increase, set not your heart on them, because they can disappear in a moment, right? Look at the most wealthy countries in the world in the Middle East. Look at how they are no longer, many people consider them no longer to be a safe place. Set not your hopes on riches, even when they increase. Once God has spoken, twice I have heard this, that power belongs to God, and that to you, O Lord, belongs steadfast love, for you will render to a man according to his work. In other words, in this time, No matter how hard things get, no matter how bad this war gets, and I do believe the war is going to get worse. I do believe the shortages are going to get more restrictive on our lifestyles. I do believe this is happening. I do believe in taking steps to be wise in difficult times. The ant stores up for the winter. The Proverbs teaches this, right? Not saying to be a hoarder, I'm just saying to be wise. But I also believe that when dark times come, that is the church's chance to shine, because our trust is in the Lord Jesus Christ. Our trust is in God who will provide for us. And with that excess that we have, we should use it to bless others who are struggling, because that's how God wants us to live. I really appreciate you joining me in this video. If you're watching this live or if you're just watching this later, I hope you get something encouraging out of it. I hope you found tonight's video informative. I highly recommend you watch the whole video, Game Theory number 9, the US-Iran War and Predictive History, Professor Liang's channel, because I am certain you will learn some cool stuff from it. Don't forget, you can pick up my book, Like a Roaring Lion, from Amazon, and Defending Conscience. It's shows us how the devil seeks to destroy us, and there's a whole chapter in this book on how the devil uses war, which you might find encouraging. Maybe we'll come back and actually do a discussion about that sometime. So God bless you. Let me pray and we'll finish off. Lord, I just thank you for your love. I thank you for your grace. I thank you for the good you've done. I pray that you would help us to be people of blessing, not people of fear. Just watch over us and be with us as we seek to be your witnesses. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, God bless you, and I will see you guys next week.